Exercises you may remember.
Good morning all, can you hear us?
Yes. Good morning, yes.
Excellent news. Are you able to see the screen showing accidents or disaster?
Yes.
Yes.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay. Do you know if Salwa and David are joining us today?
No, we're not.
Lauren, I have a question.
Lauren's just left the room a minute. She'll be back in a minute.
Okay, guys, I think we're going to make a start. Oh, sorry, did one of you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. Are we going to receive a record of this session
Yes.
after the session?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right, well, I'm now going to hand you over to our colleague Paul Kneller at Bournemouth University, and he is going to talk you through the accidents or disaster lecture. And this session will last around 50 minutes, and then there'll be time for any questions if you have any at the end, okay?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to hand you over to Paul now.
Well, good morning, or just about good afternoon. Richard asked me to talk to you about disasters and accidents. My background is in chemistry, but also in health and safety. So this starts off as being a health and safety type inquiry into what is an accident and what is a disaster. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Right. So we'll make a start then. So we have a challenge about what is a disaster and what is an accident and so on, and what creates the difference between something that's nearly happened to something that has caused a disastrous and catastrophic outcome. Well, we're going to define our disasters as being any sort of accident that has a major influence on a large number of people. And that may be that they are fatalities, or it may be that they are just inconvenienced, but actually significantly influenced by what's happening in their surroundings. So we'll move on. So what causes accidents in general? Well, there is a problem about not knowing what they're doing. So that could be that there is a lack of knowledge or training, or maybe that their documentation is incorrect or incomplete, or that there are procedures that have been devised haven't taken into consideration new challenges to that organisation. And bear in mind, of course, that these are man-made disasters and not natural disasters. There is a failure, a human failure to follow the procedure that's going on. So that there are instructions and somebody has deficiently omitted a key stage. There's also deficiency in planning, so that they've given 3 hours of time to do something that really should take 5. There's miscommunications that says, please make sure that this goes in this particular way and that you restart equipment in this following order, and that doesn't happen. Or that there is deficient supervision, so that somebody who is trained or barely trained is allowed to work on their own with very little concern of their safety and the safety of others. And then there are things which are policy problems. So we're talking here about where we've made some aims and objectives, some key stages and some KPIs from that organisation, and these have to be developed quickly and without actually thinking too much about what their impact might be. And then there are all sorts of other general things that might have occurred, that there has been a physical fault, that a bolt has sheared, which was an unexpected event, that something has happened, that there's been a trapping or entrapment of a piece of material in a gear wheel, anything, those sort of other issues. So we can move on to say from our health and safety executive what they think the performance influencing factors are in any accident, which will then move on to a serious outcome. So, okay, well, we have the job factors, as we talked about before, complexity of task, whether it's routine or unusual. And when we look at accidents, we have a profile of accidents that says if we look at when accidents occur in somebody's working life, they happen right at the beginning when they have no skills or very little skills. They learn the skills and then accident rates drop off. And then after a period of time, they re-increase again. They increase the rate. And that is because they've become unattentive. That they are, well, I can do this job. I don't really need to think about it. And then clearly sometimes they should have been, because they've had a minor cut or a crushed finger or something more disastrous than that. Then we've got the personal factors, which are about whether they are physically capable still. Maybe they were employed when they were young and now they're older and they physically can't do something, something's happened, they've got arthritis or something, they can't have the dexterity, or that they are fatigued at the end of the day, any day. And then we have a workload loading which says this is not possible to do in that day. Motivation might be money. Now, it might be a positive motivation, or it might be a motivation to not be concerned with all the safety factors that they should have been, trying to avoid interlocks and so on by wiring up makeshift overload systems. And then the organisation is about whether we have got a proper safety culture in the organisation. So all the rest of it comes down to say, if the management are concerned about safety, that influence will go throughout the workers. If they're not concerned, the safety culture is of abuse, then it will go through the whole of the organisation. So that managers don't care, then why should anybody else? So if we look at a set of human failures, and we'll look at these in terms of some case studies just in a minute, but these are the structures that we might see. So we're going to get human failures, both inadvertent and deliberate. So the ones in red these are acts of what we would call acts of commission. So they are deliberate processes. The ones on the other side are things which have happened because of inattention or something. So you can see the error types on the left-hand side. Action is not planned, or the action is planned, but there is some problem with the way that's been thinking. So you can see that we could have inadvertently a action-based slip. So we shouldn't have done that. Oh, I know that's going to happen. Memory-based lapse. I've forgotten how to do that, but I think it's like that. Rule-based, where we're going to do the action, and there is a mistake in the action that's been printed or given to them, or that there is a mistake of interpretation. And then we've got knowledge-based, so that we can just have a mistake. I thought it was going to be like that, and it isn't. And then the other side, we've got non-compliances, where we've got routine, situational, and exceptional. And we'll go through those now. So the actions on action errors are associated with the familiar tasks. So these are things that you do regularly. The builders do this. The track layers on the railway do this all the time, and they know what they're doing, but they got distracted. So if they've got distracted, then something could happen. So we could have a commission so that they've activated the wrong switch, they've used the wrong bolt, they've tightened it to the wrong torque value, or that there's a short-term memory lapse. They forgot to tighten the bolt. They left something in the patient. They jumped a step on the list of instructions. So those are the actions of errors. And then the thinking errors are where we have a rule-based error. So these are where you have a rule. It may be a bad rule that I'm going to put £20 worth of fuel in my car every week, and every week I know that by the end of the week I've still got a little bit of fuel left. But I don't consider how much the petrol has gone up in the UK over the last few weeks, so I probably actually need £25 worth of fuel. But my rule says £20 is enough. The outcome of that is an inconvenience that the car stops, but it's not a disaster. But it could be. Knowledge-based mistakes are where no rules exist, but incorrect rules are produced. A route is planned when we've got out-of-date maps. All of a sudden, we're going to go from here to there, and suddenly there's a canal in the way. It wasn't there last year, but it is there now. Our knowledge base is mistaken. And then we've got the non-compliance violations. So these are deliberately taking shortcuts, and we'll see that quite often in our disaster management, deliberate violations have occurred. So this is where we would normally have a rule and we've ignored the rule. So routinely, everybody drives a bit faster than they should be. Situationally is that, maybe there's pressures that's put on to somebody that should be doing this, and that pressure itself is an indicator of saying, well, let's just get on and do it. And the final one is that there is some calculated risk. Calculated in its inverted commas because there are no calculations that can solve this. But people take a risk that they wouldn't normally do. Ironically, people often drive faster in the rain, because it's raining, than it is when it's dry. Well, that's, from a safety point of view, makes no sense whatsoever. So Rasmussen suggested that most of the accidents that we have, which will move on to disasters as well, but most of the accidents are caused by maintenance, either because somebody has done something they shouldn't have done, or more often that they've missed something that they should have. And Rasmussen is a well-known writer of health and safety in terms of risk and so on. So he's producing these sort of things. So system errors, where we've got work situations, you can see from front here, business pressures, all the things, sorts of things, but even more detail than we had before. Unsuitable system designs. We've got human ones, personal problems. Sometimes the outside world gets into the organisation. So somebody is having a problem at home, maybe there's an illness in the family or something, and that affects their attention. Lack of motivation. Somebody has felt that they are being overlooked for promotion. They may not be quite so keen about doing things that they should do. Inattention. Something has distracted them. Or forgetfulness. As we get older, we all get slightly more forgetful. But you need to make sure that where it's skills issues and serious effects, the forgetfulness is managed somehow by note-taking or something. Taking shortcuts, taking unnecessary risk. Removal of safety equipment. It's very common in the safety industry to have a look at safety equipment. So we have interlocks and alarms and all sorts of things. And if people are paid in particular ways, the way they react to the safety equipment is different. So if you're getting paid by each piece of material that you make, people are more likely to try and override safety equipment. So if there's an interlock, they will rewire it, or they will put some sort of stop in it so that they can move their hands in and out of a cutting blade area quicker. Or that they just fail to use a piece of safety equipment. They're not wearing hard hats and gloves. Gloves in particular, because they keep having to take them off to do some fine detail. It may be that the safety equipment itself is the issue and not the error. So, okay, so let's move on to disasters itself. We have this, Anirazi is she is a writer of informations about how we might model the progression of disaster. And similar systems from this are used all over the place to see how this might happen. The case studies that we're going to use are quite old, but they are key issues that have affected people's thinking. A year ago, last week, we had a major fire in London, and there are going to become all sorts of things going to come out of that, but it's too early to tell. So these case studies that we've got are quite old, some of them, but are things which have affected the UK regulations, the way we think about stuff, or the way we might build aircraft, for example. So this is her type of modelling. So the first thing that's happened is what happens in the normal way of doing things. The social technical systems in operation, everything's working fine apparently, and it just goes on. The planes and the trains and everything are running on time, the building works, everything is safe. And then something's happened that maybe a bolt is working loose, but we do not know it yet. Or eventually we might start to get some rattling in the engine compartment that we didn't have before. Something that's just beginning to start to get into the forewarning area. When there are signs, either lights or audio horns or something like that, or cracks appearing, but they're not always obvious. And then we've got activation, so something's actually beginning to occur. So where we have, say, a train crash, what we will find is that we have a set of rails which have become loosened. That in itself is not a disaster until the next train comes over the top of it, and that then derails because the bolt is shot out, the tracks move out. The disaster itself, and then what happens immediately after that are onset and recovery, rescue. And then we start to do the post-disaster inquiry. We start to model what happened. We start to think about what was the immediate faults and what was the long-term misplanning, mismaintenance, or whatever. And so this is where we get to the situation where we are starting into immediate investigations. Can we allow this track to be repaired and trains to run on it again? Or is it such a major issue that the bridge is going to collapse? Then we need to stop that. We need to have some other routing of trains. We get feedback from everybody involved. We start to get feedback and information from people with skills. We also get feedback from people who were present or observed things. We then get to social justice. So where people are contravening the law, they should be prosecuted, but also we should recompense anybody that has had a loss, either of a relative or physical loss, financial or whatever. So social justice begins to come back. And then social reform and legislation, we might get to the stage where we are now changing laws and regulations. So we could have a look at an old air disaster. I know that you've been talking to people about air disasters and so this is an old one. This is 1990, but it changed the way planes were made. So between Birmingham and Malaga, there was a disastrous occurrence. Disastrous, but not yet a disaster. Part of the, as you see, part of the cockpit windscreen disappeared, and one of the pilots was halfway in and out of the cockpit. And if you look at the right-hand side, little picture, there's a red splatter above the far window, and that is where his head was bashing against the actual airframe. He was held in by, at that time they had 3 flight crew, and one of the flight crew held onto his legs. So this happened, and the question is, why did it happen? Is it going to happen to other planes? And the answer to that is perhaps if we're not careful. So let's learn what we can from this particular activity. So the Deputy Inspector of Air Accidents produced some common factors. So these are happening all over the place, and one on its own may not be an issue, but a number of them together may lead to an accident, according to the model that we've just seen, and we'll see how that they actually map onto actually what happened in case of the BAC 111. So all of those things, night shifts are not great, supervisors taking long hands-on involved tasks. So why are the supervisors doing it and not supervising? Interruptions to the manuals, processing, failure to use the correct control manuals, confusing information systems, handovers in the middle of an activity, not enough time, not enough staff, having to write or type all sorts of stuff out, and timing to get equipment spares is not accounted for. And then finally, there's a last one, which is interesting, which is determination to cope with all the challenges. So I'm definitely going to get this plane back into the air by 9 o'clock in the morning, no matter what. So whatever issues that I've got to overcome, I will do that. And if that means taking a few shortcuts, well, that's what I will do. That may be inculcated from the organisation, that the actual management says we cannot afford an hour's delay to this plane because that will cost us a massive amounts of money. And so the pressure has come on from the management to say, get it done no matter what. So let's have a look. So this is what happened. So on the night this has occurred, the day before the actual breaking of the window, that particular plane was taken into maintenance. And the maintenance guys had told him that there was a scratched windshield. So it wasn't easy to see through it. So all of these things happened. So we take the plane in overnight, and we'll see it repaired by the morning. However, this is what's happening generally. There's not enough staff. The night shift should be 7, is only 5, and the shift manager does the jobs that he should be supervising himself and alone. The manager was taken away from his other duties. The commissioning of all sorts of other duties was not done. The time pressures. Not only did you have to have this window taken out, replaced, sealed up, the plane had to be washed as well. It's a terrible time of day. The manager was on his first night for 5 weeks, and consequently his circadian rhythms were all over the place. He wanted to be asleep. The manual was only used to confirm that the job was straightforward. Simply take that out, swap the bolts over, put it back in again. No great complications. But it wasn't as good as it could be because the information system, the actual control manual, wasn't very clear, and the control mechanism listings weren't great. Actually getting to the window is quite difficult at the middle of the night in a fairly dark organisation, in a big warehouse. So what happened? Well, they had to put some new bolts in. The new bolts, well, I don't know what quite size bolts to put in, but it should have a listing. They went to the look at the bolts, and they appeared to be not as it was on their instruction sheet. So they chose bolts that was not on their instruction sheet and compared them to bolts that were in the trays in the stores, and looked about the right size. They ignored the advice of the storeman about the bolts. He said those are not the right ones, but he did not check it. They put them in, torqued it up to the right pressure, but they appeared to be a bit loose, so he made them a bit tighter.
Sorry, what did you buy bolts?
Pardon? Can hear your voice.
What do you mean by volts?
By volts. Torque, do you mean?
The second point in
Oh,
the
the volt.
shift manager.
Bolts. Yeah.
Yes.
The bolts by matching. So these are the bolts like big screws, but without a pointed thread on them. And they bolt into the window is bolted to the metal framework around it. And so you put those in, and there's a lot of them. There's 24 of them, I think there were. Putting in to keep the windscreen in. It wasn't glued in. It was put in with like bolts instead of screws, but bolts. And each of those bolts is a particular length, a width, a diameter of the circle of the bolt, but also the thread length, how many threads, how many rotations per inch there are. And so the bolts were just looked at visually instead of doing any measurements at all or trying them and seeing what their actual stated size was. They just looked about right. So they put in ones that they thought were good. Okay. If that's okay, I'll move on. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it's clear. Thank you.
Okay. So what you didn't notice was that the bolts didn't look like the bolts which were in the next window, which should have given him an idea that they were using the wrong bolts, but they didn't. And at the corners, they didn't get to the torque, the amount of stress, how tight they were going to be in the corners. And so all sorts of things should have told him that there was a problem, but they didn't. So what happened then was that as they took off, the pressure inside the plane, of course, was higher inside than it was outside. And as the plane flew on, the vibration loosened a couple of those bolts, which weren't in the right order, in the right threads, and they worked themselves loose. They worked themselves loose from the corner, and then because the pressure difference got so high, the window was blown outwards. The pilot was sucked outwards. Well, that's changed now, and so is the windows. But he was then held onto, luckily by one of the other flight crew, and they managed to land at Southampton, so like, I don't know, about 100 and something miles away from their starting position. So they landed quite safely. The pilot was taken to hospital and was treated for minor contusions around the head, and eventually he flew again. The co-pilot, who did a brilliant job at landing this plane on his own, with his friend being sucked out, nearly being sucked out the window, never flew again. He couldn't take the strain. But what changed was that all planes now, all passenger airliners, have their windows put in from the inside and not the outside. And there is a different sealing system with coded bolts that have got a code, special code to the bolts, different colour and different shapes than all the other bolts. But the most important thing is that the window is put from the inside of the cockpit. So that means if there is a pressure difference, suddenly from the outside to the inside, and all the bolts fell out, the pressure on the inside would keep the window in place. So this one event changed a whole load of things. The other thing that it changed was that the pilot was not required to be strapped in. They are now. Had he been strapped into his seat throughout the flight, when that had happened, it's unlikely, unless it was a trip to the bathroom or something when he wasn't locked in, that he would have been sucked out. So nowadays they have to stay strapped in their seats. So a major change as part of this review. There's a couple of other, now away from individual events to quite large disasters. This is Bhopal, and a lot of you will know about Bhopal, but it is a highlight of change of thinking of man-made disasters, because it raises a whole load of questions as about, in the simplest, whose fault was it? Well, Union Carbide in Bhopal in India produced a whole load of stuff, included using tankfuls of methyl isocyanate, which is, as you see, a fairly unpleasant chemical, causing asthmatic and poisonous, toxic oedemas and so on. So you have water in your lungs, where you can see the medical conditions. And it's very difficult to know how many people died, but at least 15,000 people probably died over the years. Why I say it's difficult to know is because these are estimated on insurance claims rather than actual people being buried. Most of the people who died were without money, lived in shanty towns, little shacks all around the place, and the records of their life is very poor, and so we didn't know whether they were alive, let alone whether they had died. There's some evidence there's quite a lot of people claiming relatives died when they were not there. So this is a Thompson-Reynolds system failing cultural readjustment model. Similar sort of stuff that we've done before, and you can see this incubation, the normal process, something that happened, disaster itself, rescue, inquiry, and feedback. So it's really very little difference to what we saw before, but it's 7 stages long. So if we look at actually what happened, was that we have 2 parallel systems. One is what's happening in the company, what's happening, what's outside in the community. So if we start with the outside, in 1100, Bhopal as a township was established, and it grew gradually until 1860 when trains came to that area, and Bhopal was a crossroads. 47, India became independent, and in 1950, the population of Bhopal, which was predominantly agricultural, with this one organisation, Union Carbide, in it, but was about 70,000. By 1984, the population was 695,000, all built without structure. So they built shanty shacks wherever they liked to, as close to the Union Carbide factory as they could possibly get, so they didn't have to go far travelling to get to work. Inside the company, you can see that everything was all right. Union Carbide for America set up Union Carbide India. They changed what sort of work they were doing. They went into agricultural, and then in '79 they licensed to make methyl isocyanate. The methyl isocyanate plant was built properly in 1981, and then from 1981 to '84 there were financial cutbacks in the company. Not about the MIC plant particularly, but that had influences on that. In '82, they were beginning to think things weren't right, as was designed by Union Carbide America for the organisation of, so for the manufacture of MIC, in the fact that there were almost no safety systems. There should have been a flare stack, which didn't exist. There should be an overpressurized gauge. There should be some water tanks, all sorts of safety systems, and automatic shut-off valves. All these things were either not working, not there, or had never been tested. So during that October, November, December of 1984, things were going wrong. They had a go, didn't know what to do really. They started washing the pipe with water, which was a disaster because methyl isocyanate reacts with water badly. It's very hot and vaporizes and boils, there's all sorts of other things, but also releases methyl isocyanate and cyanide. So on the night between December the 2nd and the 3rd, the accident actually occurred. A large amount of materials was liberated into the atmosphere. It was liberated into the atmosphere over the fence into the nearest thing that was there, which was all these shanty shacks full of people sleeping. Some of them were woken by themselves coughing or their neighbours coughing. If they did, they may have been too late. But then panic went through. No doctors were in that area, or very few, and certainly nobody knew who knew what was going on. So large numbers of people were self-treating and dying. So inside the plant, what happened was that there was this defective plant design. There was an adaptation of the plant design, which stopped safety procedures working. The tanks were poorly maintained. Safety procedures were awful. There was no testing, or that there was known failures of safety devices. There were less people than they should have been on, and top management chose to not make themselves known of any hazards. There was a safety culture here which said, if it's not a problem, don't tell me. If it's bad, don't tell me. And if it's terrible, really don't tell me, because I don't want to know. Outside the plant, the planning of the towns outside was non-existent. People could just build a shack wherever they wanted to. So the roadways, the traffic flow was impossible. People couldn't get about the place. Too many people in too small an area. And there was information that perhaps the government had failed to identify the hazard, or perhaps knew about the hazard, but was unlikely to do anything about it because there were money being transferred around the place. Or just maybe they were very good and didn't know what to do with all the community. So as a disaster, that showed all the efforts that things could have been controlled that weren't. Now, from a UK position, that's a long way away. But in 1966, going back even further now, in 1966, the thing that changed the UK's thinking about disaster management was Aberfan. Aberfan killed a large number of children, and it was the deaths of the children. We look at the coal mining industry at that sort of time, 100 people dying in the mines wasn't a particular surprise. But 116 children in one go changed thinking about everything. So this is a picture of what is Aberfan, or what was Aberfan School, and this is a picture of the headstones in the graveyard of some, nearly all, but not all, of the 116 children. What you can see here is a mining village in Wales, surrounded by hillsides, and the mining village is in a valley here. And above them, or below them, is a coal pit, and above them is a waste tip. And this is clay mixed with coal dust and rubble and all sorts of things, and it's dumped high up on the hillside. And on this particular day, a few days after it had been raining, but that was part of the issue, early in the morning, the whole of this waste tip started to slip down the hillside. And unfortunately, you can see that most of it stopped here, some of it stopped here, and there was a tongue of this sludge which went into here. As soon as it stopped moving, it started to solidify. And where it stopped was over the top of the school. Now, had it been a different week, the week afterwards, it would have, there would be nobody in the school. Had it been a different hour on that day, most of the school children would not have been in the front of the school, but in the back. And so the number of children that were killed would be disastrous. So it was a complete fluke of time. But the question is, why did it happen? Well, for a long time, the chairman at the inquiry, the chairman of the coal board, said it was completely unexpected. We didn't know anything about it. How could we possibly know that this was going to happen? And then a QC called Graham Janner started to produce documents that looked like this. So the coal board were in communication with the local borough, and they said that they're really concerned about this, There's 2 or 3 letters. This is 1963, so this is 3 years before it happened. This is again another conversation a bit later. You are no doubt aware that the tips amongst Merthyr Vale Tower among the Pantglas area, which is where the school is, if they were to move, a very serious position would accrue. I should like your observation on this as soon as possible. He did not receive any observations at all, and what he predicted unfortunately came to pass. There are some more letters. So this is 64, and again they recognise the fact that it is not perhaps the best thing to do, but we are thinking about doing something about it, but they are actually doing it. When these were shown to the inquiry, it soon became apparent that not only did there were written informations to National Coal Board, who owned the pit, but there were lots of other things that were going on, and Lord Robens, who is the chairman of the Coal Board, when he stood in front of the dock and said we knew nothing about it, was lying. Everybody who lived in that area knew that there was water under the tip all the time, because as children, a lot of them, before it started being tipped on there, would go and swim in the little pool that was out there. The water had got underneath the slurry, and then that made it a plastic movement, and it slid down the hill. Okay, so could anything be done? Well, not on the day, but prior to that, clearly things should have been sorted out. But on the day, there were 3 men working at the top of the slurry tip, and they could see it start to move. Why didn't they phone down, perhaps, to the village and get them to move? Well, first of all, it would have been very quick. They have to be very quick. Secondly is, though there was a telephone at the top of the slurry tip, there were no wires connecting it to the valley because they had been stolen 3 times previously. Copper wire has been stolen, and the Coal Board decided that it wasn't worth having a phone line up there. What I will say is that when the review came on, the Coal Board said that they would do everything they can. The general public of Great Britain rallied greatly. There were thousands of toys, millions of toys probably, and large amounts of money. The Coal Board decided then that they would take some of that money to repair all of the similar tips all around the place, all around the valleys of Wales. So this money, which was raised for the people who were distressed and had relatives die, children die, some of that money was taken by the Coal Board. That was a major issue and a major change to the way people thought about responsibilities for disasters. There is an interesting side note, is that Lord Robens, after a few years, not only when he'd been thought as being a liar on oath, became the first ever director of the Health and Safety Executive in the UK. Perhaps it's not what you know, it's who you know. We'll just do one more probably. That says this is Summerland, and this is 73 in Douglas of the Isle of Man. This had another set of difficulties and another set of commonalities of problems, which is that people were doing things that they were not, without the knowledge that they needed to do it. So this was a brand new building, was going to be impressive because it's new and modern and using new techniques and new materials, and it would be fantastic and a world beater. Now, they built a centre with a swimming pool and bars and all sorts of things on the centre, right as you can see by the seaside. So this was supposed to be able to be used 365 days of the year, no matter what it was like in the Isle of Man. Now, what happened was there was a fire and 50 people died in the disaster. Most of them from the Isle of Man is a traditional seaside place for Liverpool. Most of them came from there. Why did it start? Well, it started because there were three guys, three boys, 12 and 14, and they set fire because they were bored and were restricted from getting into the building because they had no money, to running around on the outside. They got into a plastic kiosk and they were set fire to it, just for a bit of fun, not knowing that it was all connected up to the system. As you can see, they were each fined £3 in order to pay a third of a pound compensation and 15p costs. Well, hardly anything. It wasn't, though it was their fault it started, it wasn't their issue. Now, what happened was that they decided to build this system out of new material. One is galvestos, which is like an asbestos type material, and the other one is oroglass. And both of them had major issues associated with it. The local authority had to waive their restriction on new materials for oroglass to be used. It's a bit like perspex, and it was used in the walls and in the windows. The fire area regulations of their own were ignored. They knew when it opened that they did not meet their own fire regulations. There were building errors. There were still things which were not completed when it was first opened. They had major problems about people coming in and out of the centre. So they locked doors, both indoor going in and fire doors going out, so that there were fire doors, you could not get out of them because they were locked. So the question is, what happened? Why didn't they just ring the fire alarms and everything go? Was, first of all, nobody had tested the fire alarms. They didn't know whether they worked or not. In fact, they didn't work in all areas. But secondly is nobody actually bothered to raise any fire alarm. There are two versions of events, one of which says that the first time it was known to the fire officers that there was a fire was when a taxi driver called. And the second one was that when a ship was passing, they called ship to shore saying, did you know that this was on fire? 21 minutes after the fire, and the fire officers were only 3 minutes away. So 21 minutes elapsed, and they could have been there in 3 minutes, so 18 minutes of time was wasted. This is what it looked like, lots of stairs, all sorts of exciting things. They issued a license before it opened saying, yes, we've got to do this, and it can be completed without delay, so you need to do all these things. However, the chief fire officer said there must be a fire staircase, but it didn't actually occur. So stage 2 says the social technical system. Choose the architects. Have a revolutionary design. That's brilliant. Choose specialist building materials. The oroglass was supposed to melt and fall out the windows, but actually what it did was not melt, catch fire, and then drip plastic on the people that were underneath it. The management of the complex had no idea what was going on. The sprinklers had no systems, or at least there were sprinklers in some places, but they weren't connected. The regulations were waived. The evacuation system, as two parts of the building were owned by different organisations, didn't work. There was no connection between the two, the swimming pool end and the bar end of the organisation. We know what happened. The boys did it. They set fire to the place. They did it because they were excluded, got thrown out of the centre because they sneaked in and didn't have a ticket. The people inside started to realise that it was a problem, and they started to think how they're going to get out. And they found wedged doors. And the reason why the doors were locked and wedged was that people were sneaking in the back, getting in their pain. There were glass boxes on the doors to say, break this glass, use this key to get out. Only there were no keys in the boxes. So about everything you could possibly do. So this is actually what happens. Set fire to it, and then the first call was given. There were ventilation systems that were supposed to take away smoke, but actually just didn't. The guest in the theatre, which was running at the time, was told that this fire, which was by that time quite serious, was just minor and was likely to be a chip pan fire, and they should stay where they were. Those who did died. All the fire officers from the Isle of Man, small island, attended and started to put out the fire. There was an inquiry, and the inquiry was mostly about were the right bits of materials used, and it was clear that the asbestos type material wasn't used the way it was designed to be, and Oroglass was specifically told not to be used that way by the people who made it. So Roman Haas said that you needed a deluge system, there wasn't one, and nobody knew about how the actual fire alarm system went. So all the things you could possibly think of as not being appropriate happened. The inquest was there, and they found that there was a problem with these things, that there was no real question about whether there was a fire alarm system. It just wasn't appropriate, and certainly nobody had to use it. Said the training conditions for the Isle of Man's fire service was the worst that anybody had seen, but there were issues about those places which have been identified as being fire issues ignored by the organisation. So even though the fire brigade of the Isle of Man wasn't great, they were saying this is a disaster, and nobody listened to them. So we changed everything, and the government said it was caused by a series of things that went wrong, and that the victims did not die in vain, as safety standards were changed around the world as a result. Well, that would be one thing if it happened. There's no compensation at that time for any of the survivors or families. It's amazing that hasn't happened, and that's changed, of course, dramatically. And all we got was a ticket on the home. No prosecutions for poor management, for use of the wrong material, poor design. Just a disastrous day. And we'd hoped, as the guy said earlier on, that Mr. Holland said victims would not die in vain, state standard would be changed around the world, would be so. However, not more than 3 months later in London, a underground, what we'd call a discotheque then, almost the same thing happened. There was a fire, people had been locking the fire doors, in fact they were nailed shutters in some cases, and people died within that because they couldn't get out. And those two things together changed the way that fire protection, fire management in disasters was set up in the UK. So those two fires had changed about compensation, changed about whose responsibility it was to check things, all sorts of things. In the meantime, things should have got better. And of course, what we saw a year ago in Grenfell was a similar thing. So I'm sure what we'll find as the inquiry goes forward, that a whole load of missed opportunities was present. Okay, it's probably enough from me. If there are questions, I'm very happy to answer them. Okay.
Thank you, Doctor.
Happy to take whoever.
Hey, do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. Please go ahead, Dr. Lubna. It's fine.
I just wanted to say, if the actual disaster was a natural disaster, but then the fatalities resulted from the disaster were due to a human error, what do you consider such disasters, natural or man-made?
No, these were clearly certainly exasperated if they were not. I mean, a fire is a natural disaster, but where did the fire come from? In this case, the fire came from somebody started it deliberately as a bit of fun, but had no intention of it being the case. The one in
What I meant is, like, for example, earthquakes.
yeah.
If the regulations of building of the buildings were not implementing, then the results of deaths are usually more. So in such case, on what you're gonna hook the cause of death? Is it the natural disaster or human error?
Well, that's a very good question. We could have talked about a hotel disaster in America called the Hyatt Regency, which was that they planned to build a bridge above the reception area, 3 floors up, to go from one side of the hotel to the other side. And people stood on it and danced on it when there was a dance band, and the thing collapsed because the building structure wasn't to plan. Now, if we go back to your question, which was it natural or was it man-made? Well, if they'd planned that to be as they're supposed to have done to restrict from earthquakes, which was in that area, that structure would have probably survived, was designed to survive anyway. But we will never know because it wasn't built as it was supposed to be. So in that case, we've got a natural disaster starting position, but was exasperated by the fact that that what should have been done by man wasn't. So if your building or your bridge collapse, was it designed to take foreseeable risks? And that's the issue from our point of view. It's about, was it foreseeable that there would be an earthquake? Was it foreseeable that there might be a small fire in Summerland, and could we put it out quickly? Because if it was a small fire and we put it out, we've done our job. Because there's with that many people in and out doing cooking and doing all sorts of things, there is always a risk. But if it doesn't get any further than being a minor problem, it isn't an issue. In terms of natural stuff, the powers that involved with natural disasters are enormous. So you've got to be able to plan that if you're in one of those high risk zones.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Question?
I hope they're not sleeping.
Oh, well, it might be. I can't see anybody, so that's fine.
We are awake, no question. Thank you, doctor.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, I'll just say thank you very much, and I hope that it's been of some use to you, and I'll talk to Richard sometime. Thank you, guys.
Sure. Thank you very much, doctor. Thank you.
Sorry, Lee, you finished, Paul. Well done, you. Excellent. Yeah, no, that all looks good. Thank you ever so much for doing that. Yes, start.
It's very weird talking.
It must be. Did it?